All right, in my unofficial, official, or my official, unofficial survey of a specific amount of wives, what I discovered was, in talking to hundreds, if not thousands of wives over the last 10 years, that one of the top things that they believe their husbands struggle with is showing up and being comfortable with their emotions. And I couldn't agree more, because I myself am not all that comfortable with my wife's emotions at times. And I think a lot of husbands struggle with how to show up and sit in and manage and deal with their wives' emotions. So in this video, what I want to do is I want to start a two-parter with understanding why husbands often struggle to show up and manage their wife's emotions. And in the next video, I want to talk about what husbands can actually do to better sit with those emotions. So today we're going to talk about 7 reasons that husbands struggle to show up in their wives' emotions. That's today on RelationShots. Hey, welcome to RelationShots. If this is your first time hanging out with us, don't forget to download your free guide to intimacy. You'll see a link in the description area below. You will also see lots of other resources that may help you out as well. But this free guide to intimacy will help you walk through 4 areas of intimacy in your marriage: physical, spiritual, emotional, and recreational, and give you some practical ways that you can increase connection today. All right, so what we want to talk about in this video are 7 reasons, or maybe the most common reasons, that husbands may struggle to feel comfortable with their wives' emotions. And again, here's the idea behind this. Now, you may have heard stats about how 70% of divorces are initiated by wives, but here's the reality. Women experience greater levels of negative emotion than men, generally speaking. And so that is why oftentimes women are expressing more levels of negative emotions. And there's good news to this, right? Because if husbands were in charge of rearing kids, we would have a lot less kids here on earth. And so it's good news that women are more sensitive to dangers around them and are more sensitive to things being off, are more sensitive to negative emotion, right? Experiencing negative emotion. That's a good thing, because kids need to be cared for and wives do that fantastically, right? But what happens is those negative emotions show up in marriage, and husbands often don't know what to do with them. They're uncomfortable with them and they struggle with them. And so let me highlight 7 of the reasons I think that husbands tend to struggle showing up and being comfortable and present with their wives' emotions. And number 1 is just a lack of emotional literacy or modeling, right? Many men have not been raised in environments where emotions, especially things like vulnerability, sadness, fear, were actually encouraged. Instead, they were discouraged or labeled as weak, right? If they weren't taught how to recognize or process these emotions, then they're going to feel lost and overwhelmed when confronted with their wife's feelings, right? We as men were never modeled nor taught, most of us, growing up in majority of our environments, how to manage these negative emotions, right? So guys are good at anger because that doesn't feel as weak or as vulnerable as things like sadness, depression, fear, insecurity. And so instead of experiencing all those things, we just get mad, right? We're comfortable with mad. But because we're not comfortable with that, because there were not locker rooms of sports, at least I know growing up playing sports, there was never one time where I walked into a locker room and said something like, you know what, guys, I'm just really sad this week. And all the other guys in the locker room were like, oh, come on, man, bring it in. Let's hug this out, right? That just doesn't happen. And so we don't know what to do with sadness. We don't know what to do with fear. We don't know what to do with insecurity and some of those feelings. And because it's not modeled, there's a lack of emotional literacy with a lot of men. And so they're just uncomfortable when their wife shows up in that way. A second reason they struggle is because there is a desire to fix instead of just listen, right? Again, men are often socialized to solve problems. When their wives express emotional pain, your instinct then is to fix it rather than simply listen, right? If the emotion does not have a solution, Now we're in trouble. They may feel helpless. They may feel frustrated. That may lead to some level of discomfort. And so when you've got somebody who is solution oriented, but given an array of feelings and emotions that have no solution, that kind of puts you in no man's land where you're like, I don't really know what to do about this. Well, the answer is easy. It's listen and just be there. But we don't know what to do with that because we have been brought up, and oftentimes our personality is just we want to fix, we want to solve problems, so we struggle with it. A third reason is fear of being blamed or of failing. Right? Strong emotions can feel like criticism even when they aren't. Some husbands fear that if their wife is upset, then they must have done something wrong, or that they're not good enough to make her feel happy or to make her not feel this. And so that fear can cause him to shut down or withdraw, right? There's nothing worse than feeling like a failure. And if you actually care about your wife, what that means is you care about how she's feeling. So if she's not feeling good, if she's hurting, if she's fearful, and you believe it's your job to make her not feel like that, and you realize you can't make her not feel like that, then you know what? You're going to be like, I think I might want to step away because I don't want to fail in this area. Or if you've been blamed a lot in the past, you don't want the smoke. And so you're like, I don't know if I want to show up in that way. A fourth reason I think men struggle to show up with their wife's emotions is this thing called emotional contagion, right? They can get overwhelmed, right? When somebody is close to us and they're upset, it can be emotionally contagious because our feelings and emotions are actually contagious. You do know that if you're around somebody that's always negative, that's always down, that's always depressed, that impacts you because feelings and emotions are contagious. Just like when you're around somebody that's happy, right? If somebody smiles at you, you generally smile back almost unconsciously because those feelings are contagious. So some husbands don't know how to regulate their own reactions. They don't know how to regulate their own emotions when they're running high. And so you know what? They'll withdraw, not because they don't care, but because they're overwhelmed and they don't know how to stay grounded. If I don't know how to regulate my own emotions and I'm around my wife who is also dysregulated emotionally, that's going to lead to some level of overwhelm where I'm like, dude, I can't even manage my own stuff well. And now I'm supposed to show up for you and help manage your stuff well. And that becomes overwhelming. So a lot of guys just step away because it's like, you know what? These negative emotions are contagious. I'm already feeling overwhelmed. This just makes me feel more overwhelmed. And so they don't know how to show up in that spot. A fifth way that I think men struggle is there's a fear of escalation or conflict. So some husbands associate emotional expression with arguments or drama, especially if past experiences in their childhood, prior relationships, involved emotional outbursts leading to conflict. They're going to instinctively try to avoid the situation at all costs, right? If when I grew up, whenever negative emotions were expressed, that always led to conflict, that always escalated, and that did damage. My natural tendency is like, oh, here's some negative emotions. I need to step away before it turns into a conflict, before it escalates and turns into something else. And maybe they've had experience in this marriage. Well, if that's the case, whenever negative emotions are present, if conflict always ensues and it escalates and damage is done, there's going to be a tendency to not want to sit in that space. So I think if that's evident in your marriage, there's got to be a way to share negative emotions in a way that's not going to lead to some kind of conflict. But if men sense that or are afraid of that, they're not going to be able to sit in those emotions. A sixth reason men struggle to show up in their wife's emotions is they just maybe have a difficulty with empathy or just emotional mirroring, right? Empathy requires some level of vulnerability and some self-awareness, right? And some men have not developed this muscle and they struggle to emotionally attune to their partner. That means if my wife is showing up with some kind of negative emotion and I don't know how to put myself in her shoes, I don't know how to be able to say, man, that's tough, that must be difficult. If I don't have that skill level, because one, I don't have enough self-awareness to know what to do when I feel that way, I also don't know how to show up for my wife when she feels that way. And if I can't attune to my wife without this skill, you know what? We're going to tend to respond with logic or detachment, which can seem cold even if it's not intentional, right? If you're sharing something that's emotional and I don't really know how to show up and give empathy, and I give you a logical response, that's going to feel cold. That's going to feel like you don't care. And if I've tried that a couple times and that's met with not a very good reaction, then the next thing I'm going to do is just detach. Well, it's like, well, clearly when I offer a logical solution, that's not received very well. So why don't I just offer no solution and detach? And even if my intention is not to make them feel abandoned, that's what I'm doing in the moment. So I think sometimes we struggle with that emotional mirroring and that empathy. And a final seventh reason I think men struggle with wife's emotions is that there's this perception that emotional needs are like never satisfied. Right? If you think about, like, I talk to some husbands who say, man, the frustrating thing is if my wife's got a to-do list and I knock out what's to do, then there comes another list behind it. That's often one of the complaints that men who come to counseling give. It's like, well, even if I meet my wife in these areas, it's not going to end there. That's never enough. And so sometimes husbands can feel like these emotional needs are just never satisfied. I'm never going to be able to successfully walk through all of these emotions. And if a husband feels like no matter what he does, it's never enough to meet his wife's emotional needs, guess what? He's going to feel defeated. He's going to want to quit. And this perception can lead to avoidance, resentment, withdrawal, especially if he interprets the emotional expression as a criticism of his efforts, right? So if it's like you're expressing negative emotion and that's a criticism of the efforts I am trying to give, at some point I'm going to back away and quit. Nobody wants to fail all the time. So if you tell me do this, do this, do this, do this, and every time I do that I fail, at some point I'm going to quit participating in whatever the activity or the environment is. And so for a lot of men, they just feel like, you know what, these emotional needs have no end. They're never satisfied. And so I have a real hard time sitting in something that's never satisfied because I don't know when it's going to end. And back to our tendency to fix it, if it's never satisfied and it's never going to end and I actually can't fix it, guess what I want? Not to be around it. So those are 7 reasons I believe that husbands struggle to show up and just sit in their wife's negative emotions and deal with emotions. And so let me know your thoughts on those in the comment section below. Maybe, I'm sure there's probably 100 other reasons, but those are the top 7 reasons I see. Let me know which of those, fellas, if you're watching this, let me know which of those you struggle with. Wives, if you're watching it, which one do you think is the reason your husband is struggling to show up? And in next week's video, I'm going to give you men a solution of some ways that you can show up if these 7 things are evident in your life and you struggle to sit with and show up in your wife's emotions. I'm going to give you some real practical ways that you can begin to do that in a better way. That's going to be next week. Until next time, I'll see you right back here on RelationShots.